I'm a bit of a dreamer. Well, actually a big dreamer. So one evening during dinner, I was sitting with my family and dreaming about the future. Then my younger daughter, Trudy, suddenly said, "You know what, Dad? If people will ask me again what your father does, then I will tell them he's a visionary with an engineering degree." So after we laughed about this, I told her, "But I'm not only a visionary, I'm also an entrepreneur." And then it dawned onto me, I am a visiopreneur. So what is a visiopreneur? A vision, according to John Maxwell, is a clear picture of a better tomorrow, inspired by God, which one believes not only can be done, but should be done. An entrepreneur, on the other hand, in the original French, is somebody that does what he promises. So I will define a visiopreneur as somebody that sees a picture of a better tomorrow, take action, and then executes it. Call it a dreamer and a doer all in one. And that is what I am, a visiopreneur. Now, I recently saw a list of 17 equations compiled by Ian Stewart of equations that he believes have changed the world. That includes, for example, equations like Pythagoras' theorem by Pythagoras, the law of gravity by Sir Isaac Newton, and also the relativity theory by Albert Einstein. But soon, Mr. Stewart have to add another equation, and I will call it the impact equation of life. And it takes a visiopreneur to solve a why in the impact equation of life. And why do we need to solve the equation? As Mr. Stewart said, to change the world. But before I explain to you how to solve the equation, allow me to please share my story with you. It's a story of unthinkable hope and amazing grace. Life is like a railway line. The good and the bad always runs next to each other. And that's also the story of my life. So let's start with the good side of my life. I was born in 1968 and grew up in Cape Town in a happy and stable family. I went to school, and after school I went to university in Stellenbosch, where I studied engineering. In my final year I got married to my lovely wife Audrey, and we have two beautiful daughters, Juliandre and Trudy. I started to work for a company up in Johannesburg in South Africa, and then 6 months later I was transferred to Windhoek, Namibia, to work for the same company. Probably one of the best days of my life. Then 2 years later, I moved to the north of Namibia, to Oshikati, where I opened an office and managed an office for the company. At a relative tender young age of 28, I already became associated partner of the company. I was hardworking at that stage. During that time, I also had the privilege to work in a number of African countries, Angola, Zambia, and Tanzania. I eventually came back to Windhoek in 2008, where I'm currently still staying. Now, admittedly, at that stage of my life, I was hardworking, ambitious, but let's be honest, I was chasing success and a good life. But then one morning, at the age of 34, 15 years back, while I was reading the ancient story of Nehemiah, I truly believe that God gave me a clear purpose for my life, and I discovered the why in my life. I read a story of a man that was in exile, and when he heard about his fellow Jews in Jerusalem that was troubled in despair because the walls of Jerusalem was broken down, he fell down and he cried. He then prayed to his God for forgiveness of his sins, his sins of his fathers and the sins of his people. But then something amazing happened. Nehemiah stood up. He took action. He went back to Jerusalem, and together with his fellow Jews, they rebuilt the wall of Jerusalem within 52 days. Nehemiah was a visiopreneur. As I read that story, something inside me stirred. I've seen the trouble and despair and the problems that people are in Africa, especially staying in the north of Namibia and traveling into Africa. I just knew at that moment that God was calling me as an engineer to use my skills to not only rebuild the physical walls in this world, but also the social walls. Not only can I help to build roads, buildings, sewer systems, water systems, and so on, but I can also help people with their social needs. I discovered the why in my life, and that is to make a significant impact in the lives of people. This also then led to the birth of our business in 2002, when my purpose also became the purpose why I wanted to do business. I only recently saw that even our main boardroom in our offices here in Windhoek is also built on the why. Now the why column, or as engineers we call it a split column, also symbolizes for me the two pillars on which our business is based. And that is to make a physical impact and to make a social impact. The physical impact we do through our projects: roads, water, buildings, mining, agricultural, railways, and the list goes on. The social impact we do through our foundation with the slogan "Love, Give and Guide." And we don't start our own projects. We look where people are busy, and then we help them with administrative work, with mentorship, and also with finance. Our mission instructions are clear: building people, building communities, building nations. And I always joke to say, but I think somewhere in between this, we also do some engineering work. As I look back at the journey so far, I'm humbled and amazed, especially for the people that has joined the journey. We currently have a staff of 50 people in 3 offices in Namibia, and 3 years back we opened offices in South Africa and have 2 offices in South Africa. We also recently opened an office in Ghana. We have a 30-year strategy, which is to expand into Africa for the next 15 years, and the 15 years after that, we want to expand to the rest of the world. And why? You guessed it. To make a significant impact in the lives of people. Now, as a relative young business, we also are starting to understand the principles of scaling a business. Principles such as having the right strategy and a clear strategy, effective execution, having the right people on the right places on the bus, and then also cash flow, money. And if you combine this with strong servant leadership and teamwork, you have a winning recipe. And a visiopreneur must understand these principles of scaling if you want to solve for why in this impact equation and impact the world. So that sounds like the good side and a nice story. Now for the other side of the story, the not so nice part of the story. When I was 15, I was diagnosed with a colon disease, and I was told that one day it might lead to cancer. At the age of 30, the colon disease affected my liver, and I was told that one day I will need a liver transplant. So while building a business, being a father, being a husband, I constantly faced health challenges. Especially the last 10 years of my life was quite tough. Then in 2014, my colon started to show signs of early cancer. And I had my first operation and then we removed my colon. I recovered well, but a year later in 2015, my liver suddenly got bad. I was put on a liver transplant program and waited for a liver. I was on a 24-hour call, so if they found my liver, within 24 hours you need to be in Joburg for the operation. Beginning of 2017, and that's a picture of me end of 2016. So shortly after that, it suddenly got very bad. I was at home and fell unconscious, and I was flown out of Windhoek on an emergency flight on the 13th of January to Johannesburg to the liver transplant clinic. Upon my arrival, the doctors told my wife, he's knocking on the door. and will most likely not survive. And what made the situation even worse is I was been taken off the transplant list. My liver stopped functioning, my kidneys dried up, I had water on my lungs, and my heart was very weak. But then, 6 days later, the doctors managed to stabilize me. I was transferred to the high care unit. That was the first miracle. 10 days later, on the 1st of February, the second miracle happened. The doctors told me, your body recovered strong enough, you're back on the transplant list. But then the waiting had to start all over again. But not for long. The third miracle. The next day, they told me they found me a liver. So on the 3rd of February, I was operated, I received my new liver, and I was reborn to be able to stand here today before you, as I call myself the upgraded version 2.1. I recovered very fast. That was also a miracle. 2 weeks later, I was out of hospital, and my partners came to Windhoek, and we had our first meeting, to Johannesburg, and we had our first meeting in Johannesburg. 5 months later, as you can see, I looked brand new. 2 months later, I was back, after the operation, I was back in Windhoek, back at office. I've got more energy than before, enjoying life more than before, and dreaming even bigger than I dreamed before. But why do I want to share my story with you? First, I think it's important that all of us must have a purpose in life that we need to discover. Otherwise, life is meaningless. Secondly, bad things happen. Bad things happen to good people also. And we can learn something from that. So what did I learn from my bad experiences? After a few months, I was reflecting back on what happened with me. And a thought came to my mind. Before the transplant, my body was functional. I could work, I could do things, but I was sick. It was only when I received a new liver that my body started to heal completely. A good example is my nails. As you can see, there's a clear line 5 months after the operation as my new nail started to grow out again. And then I thought, that's almost how the world is today. The world is functional, but is sick. If it was healthy, why do we see the symptoms of poverty, conflict, hunger, racism, inequity? There's people with good lives, but the majority of the people in this world is suffering. The rich are getting richer, the poor is getting poorer, the gap is widening. The world needs a liver transplant. And maybe, just maybe, you and me are the cells to form the tissue of the new liver to be transplanted into the new body so that the world can be healed. We as visiopreneurs need to see this picture of a better world and start to build it. A world where leaders and visionaries stop building their own kingdoms and start to build kingdom or heaven on earth together. A world where leaders become servant leaders and where we work together as co-creators of this new earth. A world where there's communities that love, care, and share wealth with each other. A world of hope, of peace, stability, and harmony, without poverty. But for this to happen, one person can't do this alone. Almost like with my nail, we need to draw a line. It is time to change the me into the we. Back to the story of Nehemiah. When Nehemiah was ready to start rebuilding the walls, he called the people to action with the words, let's rise up and build. And today I'm also calling fellow visiopreneurs to say, let's solve for why in this impact equation of life. And let's impact the world. So how do we solve then for why in this impact equation of life, which everybody is now waiting for? First, let me explain how the equation works. The function of why is to make a significant impact in the lives of people in order to change the world. And to do that, we need to sum up a number of visiopreneurs by first starting with two people that the me turns into the we. And then we simply repeat that a few times. Let me illustrate. If we are two people become 4. 4 becomes 8. And you can see what happens. If we repeat this only 22 times, then we've impacted 2.1 million people. Most amazingly, if you repeat it another 11 times, you've impacted 8.6 billion people, which is soon to be the population of this earth. How difficult can this be? Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of committed, thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Like Nehemiah, we have to see the trouble and the despair our people are in. We need to admit where we did wrong. We need to rectify that. We need to become a community of like-minded, like-hearted people. Become the new liver by turning the me into we. We need to see a picture of a better world. Take action and execute it. Be a visiopreneur and let's change the world together. Let's rise up and build.